Picture this: a flat, muddy wilderness stretching endlessly toward a gray lake. The year is 1850, and if you're standing where downtown Chicago is today, your boots are sinking into black swamp mud. There are no skyscrapers here, no cars, no noise except wind howling across tall prairie grass and waves crashing on the shore of Lake Michigan. Wooden shacks dot the landscape, maybe 300 or so, connected by dirt paths that turn into rivers of muck when it rains. This is Chicago, a village of barely 5,000 people clinging to the edge of wilderness. The United States is exploding westward. Gold rushes manifest destiny, railroads punching through virgin forests. Chicago sits at the perfect spot, a natural hub between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Entrepreneurs see the future here. They arrive with axes and ambition, cutting down forests, draining swamps, laying wooden planks over mud so wagons can pass. The economy runs on lumber and grain. Farmers from the prairies bring wheat and corn to sell. Ships carry it across the lakes to feed the growing eastern cities. Life here is brutal and simple. Most people work dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. Breakfast is bacon, beans, and coffee, so strong it could strip paint. Houses are rough timber, 1 or 2 rooms, heated by wood stoves that fill lungs with smoke. There are no sewers, no clean water systems. People dump waste in the streets. The Chicago River, which should be beautiful, is an open sewer flowing backward into the lake where everyone drinks. Disease is everywhere. Cholera outbreaks hit every summer, filling mass graves. Typhoid fever takes children regularly. If you make it to 40 years old, you're lucky. Entertainment is simple. Church on Sunday, maybe a saloon for the men, quilting circles for the women. The city has big dreams but muddy reality. William Ogden, the first mayor, looks at this swamp and sees a metropolis. Most people think he's crazy. They have no idea. The year is 1860, and war is coming. 1861, the nation tears itself apart. The Civil War begins, and Chicago becomes the engine that feeds the Union Army. Railroads now crisscross the city like iron veins, 11 different lines converging here, making Chicago the rail hub of America. Trains arrive daily loaded with cattle, hogs, and grain from across the Midwest. The Union stockyards open in 1865, covering 320 acres, the largest livestock market on Earth. Blood runs in rivers here, literally. Workers slaughter thousands of animals daily, processing them into salt pork and beef for soldiers fighting in the South. The city explodes from 30,000 people to 300,000 in just 10 years. Money pours in. Entrepreneurs like Philip Armour build meatpacking empires worth millions. Grain merchants, railroad barons, lumber tycoons, they all get rich fast. The nouveau riches build mansions on Prairie Avenue, while workers live in squalid wooden tenements near the stockyards, where the air smells permanently of blood and manure. Chicago earns a nickname, Porkopolis. Work is hard and dangerous. Men work 12-hour shifts in freezing cold or brutal heat. Children as young as 10 work in factories. Women sew uniforms, roll cigars, or take in laundry. No labor laws, no safety regulations. If you get hurt, you're replaced tomorrow. The city is still mostly wood, buildings packed tight, chimneys belching smoke, streets still muddy, except now churned by thousands of wagon wheels and horse hooves. Fires break out constantly, small ones quickly contained. People get complacent. The war ends in 1865. Chicago keeps growing, now fueled by westward expansion and European immigration. Germans, Irish, Swedes, Poles, they arrive by the thousands seeking opportunity. Neighborhoods form by ethnicity. Tensions simmer. Freed Black Americans migrate north looking for work and meet hostility. But business booms. The future looks bright. It's October 8, 1871. Mrs. O'Leary's cow allegedly kicks over a lantern. Or maybe it's something else. Nobody knows for sure. But what happens next will destroy almost everything and, paradoxically, make Chicago immortal. The Great Chicago Fire burns for 3 days straight. It starts on the southwest side on that October night in 1871 and rips through the city like a living thing, feeding on mile after mile of wooden buildings packed together like kindling. The flames jump the Chicago River twice, devouring everything: commercial districts, residential neighborhoods, churches, hotels, even the waterworks. When it finally burns itself out on October 10th, 17,450 buildings are gone, turned to ash and twisted metal. 300 people are confirmed lost, though the real number is probably higher. 100,000 people, a third of the city's population, are suddenly homeless, standing in the smoking ruins with nothing but the clothes on their backs. But here's the thing about Chicago. It doesn't stay down. Within days, merchants are selling goods from temporary shacks. Within weeks, architects and engineers from across America and Europe arrive, seeing opportunity in catastrophe. The city passes new building codes requiring fireproof construction, brick and stone and iron instead of wood. Insurance money floods in, millions of dollars. Property owners rebuild fast, but this time they build up, not just out. This is the moment when Chicago becomes the birthplace of the modern skyscraper. Architects like William LeBaron Jenney pioneer steel frame construction, which allows buildings to rise 10, 12, even 16 stories high, something impossible with traditional masonry. The Home Insurance Building, completed in 1885, is considered the world's first skyscraper, standing 10 stories tall with a revolutionary steel skeleton. The city transforms from a prairie town into a modern metropolis in less than 2 decades. The population doubles, then doubles again, reaching 1 million by 1890. Electric streetlights replace gas lamps. Horse-drawn streetcars give way to cable cars, then elevated trains, the famous L system that still runs today. The stockyards expand even larger, processing millions of animals annually. Factories multiply, producing steel, farm equipment, furniture, clothing. Money flows like the Chicago River, which engineers actually reverse in 1867, making it flow away from the lake to protect the drinking water. A feat of engineering that astonishes the world. Daily life improves for some, worsens for others. The wealthy build grand mansions along Prairie Avenue and the Gold Coast, showing off their fortunes with ballrooms, servants, imported marble, and French furniture. But most people live in crowded tenements, entire families in 1 or 2 rooms, sharing toilets in hallways, no running water, garbage piling in alleys. Workers still labor 12 to 14 hours daily in dangerous conditions. Child labor is everywhere, small hands perfect for factory work. The gap between rich and poor becomes a chasm. Immigrants keep arriving, now from Italy, Poland, Russia, Greece, Lithuania, creating a patchwork of ethnic neighborhoods, each with its own churches, restaurants, newspapers, and traditions. The culture of the city is pure ambition, ruthless and creative at once. Daniel Burnham and John Root design architectural marvels. Louis Sullivan creates the foundation for modern architecture with his philosophy that form follows function. The city hosts the world's Columbian Exposition in 1893, attracting 27 million visitors who marvel at electric lights, the first Ferris wheel, and gleaming white buildings called the White City. Chicago wants the world to see it as sophisticated, modern, powerful. But beneath the surface, tensions are boiling. Workers are tired of being crushed by the machinery of progress. The year is 1890, and labor is about to fight back with everything it has. Welcome to the Chicago that built modern America, and it smells like blood, coal smoke, and sweat. By 1890, this city is the second largest in the United States, home to over 1 million people, and growing by thousands every month. The skyline is a forest of smokestacks, factories running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, churning out steel beams, railroad cars, agricultural machinery, canned meat, and thousands of other products shipped across the continent. The Union stockyards alone employ 25,000 workers, slaughtering and processing 9 million animals yearly. Upton Sinclair will later write The Jungle, exposing the horrific conditions there, describing floors slick with blood, rats the size of cats, and workers losing fingers to machinery with no compensation. The economy is booming, but the human cost is staggering. Most factory workers earn between $1.50 and $2 per day, barely enough to survive. A typical workday is 12 hours, often 6 days a week, in conditions that would be illegal today. No safety equipment, no breaks, no job security. Women and children work alongside men for even less pay. Accidents are common and deadly, crushed by machines, burned by molten metal, poisoned by chemicals. If you're injured, you're fired and replaced immediately. There are no unions strong enough to protect you yet, though that's changing fast. The gap between the millionaire industrialists living in lakefront mansions and the workers crammed into filthy tenements is obscene and unsustainable. Daily life for working-class families is a cycle of labor, exhaustion, and survival. Breakfast might be bread and coffee. Lunch is whatever you can afford from a street vendor. Dinner is beans, potatoes, and meat when you can get it. Housing is overcrowded and dangerous. Wooden tenements packed so tight that fires spread in minutes, which they do regularly. Disease is rampant. Tuberculosis, diphtheria, scarlet fever, killing children by the thousands annually. Life expectancy for a poor worker is maybe 45 years if you're lucky. There's little time for leisure, but when there is, people gather in beer gardens, ethnic social clubs, vaudeville theaters, or the new Nickelodeons showing moving pictures for a nickel. The culture of resistance grows alongside the culture of exploitation. Chicago becomes a center of labor organizing, socialism, and anarchism. Workers demand 8-hour workdays, fair wages, and safe conditions. On May 4, 1886, the Haymarket Affair explodes into violence when a bomb kills 7 police officers during a labor rally, leading to a controversial trial and the execution of 4 anarchists, making them martyrs for the labor movement. Strikes become common and brutal. Pullman strike of 1894 shuts down railroads nationwide. Troops are called in. Violence erupts. The city is a battleground between capital and labor, progress and justice. But Chicago keeps building, keeps growing, keeps dreaming bigger. The elevated train system expands, connecting neighborhoods and suburbs. Skyscrapers keep rising taller. The Masonic Temple building reaches 22 stories in 1892. Department stores like Marshall Field's become palaces of consumption, where the wealthy shop and the poor gaze through windows. Cultural institutions emerge: the Art Institute, Symphony Orchestra, libraries funded by philanthropists trying to civilize the rough city they helped create. Jane Addams opens Hull House in 1889, providing social services to immigrants and the poor, proving that not everyone with money is heartless. The city is contradictions piled on contradictions, beautiful and brutal, innovative and exploitative, a place where fortunes are made and lives are ground to dust. The year is 1920, and everything is about to get wild in a way nobody expects. Prohibition is coming, and with it, a whole new kind of Chicago will be born. January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment becomes law, and alcohol is now illegal across the United States. The government thinks this will create a sober, moral nation. Instead, it creates the most profitable criminal enterprise in American history, and Chicago becomes its capital. Within months, speakeasies, secret bars hidden behind fake storefronts, barbershops, and laundromats open by the hundreds across the city. You knock on an unmarked door, whisper a password, and inside you find jazz music, cigarette smoke, and illegal gin flowing like water. The wealthy drink imported scotch smuggled from Canada. The poor drink bathtub gin that sometimes blinds or kills them, but everyone drinks because prohibition doesn't stop desire. It just makes it profitable for criminals. Enter Alphonse Gabriel Capone, a Brooklyn thug who arrives in Chicago in 1921 and within years becomes the most famous gangster in America. Capone takes control of bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling on the South Side, making an estimated $100 million annually, equivalent to over $1.5 billion today. He operates openly, bribing police, judges, and politicians, dining in expensive restaurants, attending the opera, giving to charities, playing the role of a businessman who just happens to run an empire built on violence. The streets become war zones as rival gangs, Irish, Italian, Polish, fight for territory and profits. Thompson submachine guns, nicknamed Chicago typewriters, become the weapon of choice, spraying bullets in broad daylight. Life in 1920s Chicago is intoxicating and dangerous in equal measure. If you're wealthy or middle class, you're living in the Jazz Age. Women wear short dresses and bob their hair. Men wear fedoras and drive cars. Everyone dances to Louis Armstrong and King Oliver playing at clubs in Bronzeville, the thriving black neighborhood on the South Side, where jazz is being invented in real time. The city feels modern, electric, alive, with possibility. But if you're poor, if you're an immigrant working in the stockyards or factories, life is still brutally hard, low wages, long hours, dangerous work, and now the added threat of gang violence spilling into your neighborhood. The police are either corrupt or overwhelmed. Justice is for sale, and ordinary people just try to survive. The architecture of the era reflects the contradictions. Art Deco skyscrapers like the Chicago Board of Trade building rise downtown, beautiful and sleek, while tenements and speakeasies hide in shadowy alleys. The city's reputation spreads worldwide. Chicago means gangsters, jazz, corruption, and excitement. Tourists come to gawk at the danger from a safe distance. Then, on February 14, 1929, the St. Valentine's Day incident happens. 7 members of the Bugs Moran gang are lined up against a garage wall and executed by men dressed as police officers, almost certainly on Capone's orders. The brutality shocks even Chicago, a city used to violence. The feds finally decide Capone has to go, but they can't get him for the violence, so they get him for tax evasion in 1931. By 1933, prohibition is repealed. The party is over, but Chicago's reputation is permanent. And just as the illegal booze stops flowing, the entire economy collapses. October 1929, the stock market crashes, and within months, the Great Depression slams into Chicago like a wrecking ball. By 1933, 1 million people in the city are unemployed. That's nearly half the workforce. Factories close, stockyards reduce operations, construction stops completely. Bread lines stretch for blocks, thousands of desperate people waiting for free food. Shanty towns, called Hoovervilles after President Hoover, spring up in empty lots where homeless families live in shacks made of scrap wood and cardboard. The lakefront, once a symbol of prosperity, now hosts makeshift camps of the destitute. This is a city that built itself on relentless ambition, suddenly paralyzed by poverty and despair. President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal brings some relief. Federal programs put people back to work, building infrastructure, parks, schools, and public housing projects. The Works Progress Administration employs thousands in Chicago, constructing Lakeshore Drive, improving public spaces, and funding art projects. It's not enough to end the Depression, but it keeps people from starving and gives them dignity through work. Then, December 7, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and everything changes instantly. America enters World War II, and Chicago becomes a massive war production machine. Factories that made cars now make tanks and airplane parts. Shipyards work around the clock. Women take factory jobs previously reserved for men, and suddenly, everyone who wants work can find it. The war years transform the city again. Rationing limits food, gasoline, and consumer goods. But people accept it as patriotic duty. Victory gardens appear in backyards and vacant lots. The population swells as workers migrate from the South, particularly black families fleeing Jim Crow and seeking jobs in northern factories, a movement called the Great Migration. Chicago's black population doubles during the 1940s, creating tension as white residents resist integration. Housing discrimination confines black families to overcrowded neighborhoods, restrictive covenants prevent them from buying homes in white areas, and violence occasionally erupts. The city is prosperous again, but deeply segregated. Two Chicagos existing side by side, separate and unequal. Public housing projects rise across the city. Massive complexes designed to provide affordable apartments for working families. At first, they're seen as modern and hopeful, but they're also segregated and underfunded from the start. Cultural life thrives despite the challenges. Jazz clubs remain vibrant, blues music grows in popularity, and the city's ethnic neighborhoods maintain strong communities through churches, social clubs, and family networks. Richard J. Daley begins his political rise, building the democratic machine that will dominate Chicago politics for decades. The war ends in 1945 with victory and relief. Soldiers come home to a booming economy, suburbs begin expanding rapidly, and the automobile becomes king. The year is 1950, and Chicago stands on the edge of massive transformation, for better and worse. The next 2 decades will bring prosperity to some and abandonment to others, splitting the city in ways still visible today. The 1950s bring prosperity to America, but Chicago becomes 2 cities occupying the same space. White families with new cars and steady factory jobs flee to the suburbs: Oak Park, Evanston, Skokie, Naperville, places with green lawns, good schools, and no black neighbors. The Federal Housing Administration and GI Bill make suburban home ownership easy for white families, while systematically denying the same loans to black families through a practice called redlining, literally drawing red lines on maps around black neighborhoods and declaring them too risky for investment. Meanwhile, The Great Migration continues. Hundreds of thousands of black families arrive from Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, seeking freedom and opportunity, only to find themselves trapped in increasingly segregated neighborhoods on the south and west sides. Downtown Chicago empties out as businesses follow white customers to the suburbs. The famous State Street shopping district begins its decline. Mayor Richard J. Daley, who takes office in 1955 and rules like a king for 21 years, decides the solution is massive highway construction and urban renewal, which really means demolition of poor neighborhoods, mostly black and Latino, to make room for expressways and public housing towers. The Dan Ryan and Eisenhower expressways slice through communities like concrete knives, destroying businesses and homes, isolating neighborhoods, creating physical barriers that still divide the city today. Entire blocks are bulldozed, and families are relocated to massive high-rise public housing projects. Cabrini Green, Robert Taylor Homes, places that become synonymous with poverty, neglect, and despair. Life for middle-class suburbanites is comfortable. New appliances, television, backyard barbecues, the American dream realized. But in the city's segregated neighborhoods, life is increasingly difficult. Schools are overcrowded and underfunded. Jobs disappear as factories close or move. Housing deteriorates, and police treat residents with suspicion and hostility. Yet culture thrives in these communities. Chicago becomes the capital of electric blues, with legends like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Buddy Guy playing small clubs on the South Side, creating music that influences rock and roll worldwide. Gospel music fills churches, jazz clubs remain vibrant, and black-owned businesses create economic networks despite systematic discrimination. Tensions explode in the 1960s. The civil rights movement reaches Chicago when Martin Luther King Jr. comes to the city in 1966 to fight housing segregation, leading marches through white neighborhoods where residents throw rocks and bottles, screaming hatred, proving that racism isn't just a Southern problem. King later says he faced worse hostility in Chicago than anywhere in the South. Then, April 4, 1968, King is taken from the world in Memphis, and Chicago erupts, alongside cities nationwide. The West Side burns for days, 9 individuals lose their lives, hundreds of buildings are destroyed, the National Guard occupies the streets. The city never fully recovers from that trauma. 4 months later, August 1968, the Democratic National Convention comes to Chicago, and Mayor Daley turns the city into a police state. Anti-war protesters flood downtown, police attack them with clubs and tear gas in front of television cameras, the whole world watching as American democracy beats its own children in the streets. The 1960s end with Chicago scarred, divided, and angry. The industrial economy that built the city is starting to crumble. Factories begin closing, jobs evaporate, and nobody in power seems to notice or care. The year is 1970, and the worst is yet to come. The 1970s and 80s hit Chicago like a slow-motion disaster. The industries that made the city great, steel mills, meatpacking plants, manufacturing, shut down or move overseas where labor is cheaper. The Union Stockyards, once the largest in the world, closed completely in 1971 after a century of operation, putting thousands out of work overnight. Factories across the south and west sides follow, leaving behind empty buildings with broken windows and rusting equipment. Entire neighborhoods lose their economic base. Unemployment reaches 30, 40, even 50% in some areas. The term Rust Belt is invented to describe this collapse, and Chicago is ground zero. Without jobs, communities unravel. The public housing towers, already neglected by the city, become vertical slums controlled by gangs who fill the economic void left by legitimate business. The availability of illicit substances, particularly a specific substance that arrives in the 1980s, creates a crisis. Incidents of violence skyrocket. Chicago averages over 700 per year through the 1990s, concentrated almost entirely in poor Black and Latino neighborhoods, while white areas remain relatively safe. The city doesn't just tolerate this disparity, it enforces it through aggressive policing that targets communities of color while doing little to address root causes like poverty, lack of opportunity, and systematic disinvestment. Schools in poor neighborhoods crumble, hospitals close, grocery stores leave, creating food deserts. It's abandonment as policy. But even in the darkest times, culture and resilience persist. Hip-hop emerges from the projects and streets. Artists like Common and Kanye West start their careers in Chicago, telling stories of survival and creativity amid decay. House music, invented in Chicago in the 1980s, spreads worldwide from clubs like The Warehouse. Neighborhood organizations, churches, and community activists fight to save their communities, running programs, feeding kids, creating safe spaces. And politically, something historic happens in 1983 when Harold Washington becomes Chicago's first black mayor, winning despite a racist backlash and a city council that tries to block him at every turn. His victory proves that change is possible, even if his sudden passing in 1987 cuts short his vision. Downtown begins a slow comeback in the 1990s. Tourism grows, Navy Pier is renovated, new restaurants and shops open, young professionals move into converted loft buildings in formerly industrial areas. But this renaissance is deeply uneven. Investment flows to white and wealthy areas, while poor neighborhoods remain forgotten. The contrast becomes stark. You can stand in the Loop surrounded by gleaming towers and prosperity, then travel 20 minutes south or west and find yourself in what looks like a war zone. Boarded buildings, empty lots, despair. Two Chicagos, always two Chicagos. The year 2000 arrives with new technology, new optimism, and the same old inequalities. The 21st century promises change, but whether that change will heal or deepen the city's divisions remains an open question. The new millennium brings a different Chicago, shinier on the surface, but still fractured beneath. Downtown transforms dramatically. The skyline explodes with new construction, glass and steel towers rising higher than ever. Millennium Park opens in 2004, turning 16 acres of former railroad yards into a world-class public space, with the famous Cloud Gate sculpture, nicknamed the Bean, which becomes the most photographed spot in the city. The Chicago Riverwalk gets renovated, turning an industrial waterway into a beautiful pedestrian promenade lined with restaurants and bars. Tourism booms, over 50 million visitors annually by 2015, spending billions of dollars, gawking at architecture, eating deep dish pizza, taking selfies with skyline views. The economy shifts from manufacturing to services, finance, technology, healthcare, and education. Major corporations maintain headquarters here. Boeing moves in, Google and Facebook open offices, startups flourish in neighborhoods like Fulton Market and River North, where old meatpacking warehouses become trendy tech spaces. Young professionals flood into the city, reversing decades of population decline. But this growth comes with a cost called gentrification. Neighborhoods like Wicker Park, Logan Square, and Pilsen, once affordable homes for working-class families, see property values skyrocket as wealthy newcomers arrive seeking authenticity. Longtime residents, mostly Latino and Black families, get priced out, forced to move farther from the center as rents double and triple. Coffee shops replace corner stores, artisanal restaurants replace taquerias, and the character of neighborhoods changes completely. Life in 2000s. Chicago depends entirely on where you live and what you look like. If you're white and educated with a good job, the city is a playground. Incredible restaurants representing every cuisine on earth. World-class museums, comedy clubs where stars like Tina Fey and Stephen Colbert got their start, music venues hosting everyone from indie bands to international superstars, professional sports teams in every major league. You live in a renovated loft or new condo, you bike on protected lanes, you shop at Whole Foods, you feel safe. But if you're Black or Latino living on the South or West Side, Chicago is still a struggle. Schools are underfunded. Hospitals close, leaving healthcare deserts. Grocery stores remain scarce. Police harassment continues, and the availability of illegal substances and gang activity persists. Incidents of violence remain concentrated in these neglected neighborhoods, hundreds annually, mostly young men of color. A crisis the city talks about constantly, but never truly addresses. Culture and politics intertwine in unexpected ways. Barack Obama, a community organizer turned politician who lives in Hyde Park on the South Side, becomes a U.S. senator in 2004 and then, impossibly, President of the United States in 2008, the first Black president in American history. Chicago celebrates like never before. A hometown kid made good on the world's biggest stage. Proof that anything is possible. But Obama's presidency doesn't solve Chicago's problems. The inequalities remain, the violence continues, the two Chicagos persist. Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Obama's former chief of staff, runs the city from 2011 to 2019, pushing development and attracting investment, but also closing dozens of public schools and mental health clinics, deepening distrust between City Hall and poor communities. The contradictions are everywhere. The city demolishes the last of the notorious public housing towers. Cabrini Green comes down in stages through the 2000s, replaced by mixed-income developments that promise integration, but often just displace poor families to other struggling areas. Technology companies promise a better future, while automation eliminates jobs. Tourists photograph beautiful architecture while ignoring homeless people sleeping in the shadows of those same buildings. Chicago's restaurant scene becomes internationally famous, while food insecurity affects hundreds of thousands of residents. The city markets itself as world-class, while its public school system struggles with budget crises and teacher strikes. The year is 2019, and Chicago is more prosperous than it's been in decades, more unequal than ever, and completely unprepared for what's about to hit. A global health crisis is coming that will test everything. March 2020, everything stops. A global health crisis emerges from China and spreads worldwide, forcing governments to implement unprecedented measures. Chicago shuts down almost completely. Schools close, businesses close, restaurants switch to takeout only, streets empty in ways not seen since the Great Depression. People wear masks, stay 6 feet apart, work from home if they're lucky enough to have jobs that allow it. The lakefront closes, Michigan Avenue sits empty, the L trains run nearly vacant. For a city that never stops moving, the stillness is eerie and unsettling. The health crisis hits poor communities hardest, as it does everywhere. Crowded housing makes distancing impossible. Essential workers risk exposure daily. Hospitals in Black and Latino neighborhoods get overwhelmed, while wealthier areas have better access to care. By the end of 2020, thousands of Chicagoans have been lost, disproportionately people of color, the old, and the vulnerable. But the city adapts and survives. Restaurants create outdoor dining areas in parking spaces and streets, keeping businesses alive through brutal winters. Cultural institutions pivot to virtual programming. Neighbors help neighbors. Mutual aid networks form. Communities prove their resilience. Then, May 25, 2020, George Floyd is lost in Minneapolis, and protests erupt nationwide, including massive demonstrations in Chicago demanding police reform and racial justice. The city responds with a mix of peaceful marches and occasional property damage, forcing conversations about systematic inequality that have been avoided for decades. Some changes happen, police reforms are proposed, investments in under-resourced communities increase slightly, but whether these represent real transformation or just symbolic gestures remains unclear. The period from 2021 to 2026 brings gradual recovery and ongoing challenges. The economy rebounds unevenly. Downtown offices remain partially empty as remote work becomes permanent for many, but restaurants and entertainment venues come back strong. Tourism returns slowly, then surges. New skyscrapers continue rising, including the St. Regis Tower, which becomes the city's third tallest building. Climate change becomes impossible to ignore. Summers grow hotter with dangerous heat waves affecting vulnerable populations. The city invests in green infrastructure, planting thousands of trees, creating green roofs, improving public transit to reduce carbon emissions. Lori Lightfoot becomes Chicago's first black woman mayor in 2019, followed by Brandon Johnson in 2023, both promising to address inequality and violence with varying degrees of success. The Chicago of 2026 is a city still becoming, still struggling with the same divisions that have defined it for a century, still trying to live up to its potential. The lakefront remains beautiful. The architecture remains stunning. The culture remains vibrant with world-class food, music, comedy, and art. But the south and west sides still struggle with disinvestment. The schools remain unequal. The violence continues, though reduced from its worst years. The poverty persists. This is Chicago, a city built by ambitious dreamers on a swamp, destroyed by fire and rebuilt stronger, enriched by generations of immigrants, scarred by racism and inequality, capable of both breathtaking beauty and heartbreaking injustice. From 5,000 people in 1850 to 2.7 million today, from muddy frontier town to global metropolis, Chicago has never stopped evolving, never stopped fighting, never given up. The question for the next chapter: can it finally become one city instead of two? Can it extend opportunity to everyone? Can the gap between its promise and its reality finally close? The answer depends on choices being made right now, in boardrooms and ballot boxes, in classrooms and community meetings, by people who refuse to accept that this is as good as it gets. Chicago has always been about audacious ambition. Maybe it's time to be audacious about justice too.